So we've been going through the book of Judges. And first of all, I'm just so pleased you guys keep coming back because I feel like each week the stories are so full of violence and so full of tragedy. So well done for making it back for another week. We come to the end of the book, not the series. That's what praise meant. So we come to the end of the book of Judges. But we've got 2 more Sundays. We're going to look at Samuel, who's a prophet, but he was also the last judge. And then we'll be done with this series. But before we begin, I want us in a very fun way to review what we've done so far in Judges, just to help jog your memory and remind you guys. So one of our lovely CGs put something together, and I'm going to have us play it now. And welcome to our summary of Judges.
From Embakasi CG to Renewal Church. You hear me now? The people stray them forget the king. So just send the judge for rise and bring. Judge by judge. Step in the scene like Gideon's crew. 300 man, but the spirit came true. Samson swing with the jawbone too. Enemies fall when the righteous move. Cycles of sin, man, fall in the trap. Idols on the block, then the Lord push back. Cry out loud, he go answer that. Raise up a judge and the nation snap back. Judge by judge, fire get heavy. Dark road, man, but the word stay steady. Chains get break when the spirit move ready. Kingdom come, no harm and petty. Judge by judge, nation shake. Sinners run when the spirit awake. From dust, man, the righteous break. Glory of the Lord, no man can fake. Deborah sit on the palm shield. Prophetess fire, Barak take heed. Jael with the peg, strike down speed. Victory come when the righteous bleed. Samson lock, but the hair grow long. Push them pillars, the weak made strong. Jephthah vow, but the cost went wrong. Still the Lord use man all along. Judge by judge, fire get heavy. Dark road man, but the word stay steady. Chains get break when the spirit move ready. Kingdom come, no harm and petty. Judge by judge, nation shake. Sinners run when the spirit awake. From dust man, the righteous break. Glory of the Lord, no man can fake. Rise up, people are Renewal Church. Put down idols, stop relying. Every man do what's right in them eyes. But the judge of heaven come break the lies. Streets full dark, but the word still shines. History spinning prophetic lines. Judge by judge, time after time. God raised the chosen, justice alive. Judge by judge, fire get heavy. Dark road man, but the word stay steady. Chains get break when the spirit move ready. Kingdom come, no harm and petty. Judge by judge, nation shake. Sinners run when the spirit awake. From dust man, the righteous break. Glory of the Lord, no man can fake.
Thank you to Embakasi CG. So all the other CGs, I don't know. Our next series is going to be. But anyway, guys, now that I have you all in such a great mood, I'm not sure whether to start off today's sermon by apologizing to everybody in advance or asking you to belt up your seats or to pick your choice, because it's going to be a bit of a wild ride. So today we're looking at the last 5 chapters of Judges, and this part of the book is not for the faint-hearted. And for the parents with kids in the house, it's definitely not PG anything. Now, with this many chapters to go through, sometimes what people do is they pick up a theme or some key verses to focus on. But as I was preparing, I got the strong sense that God wants us to go through all the stories in these chapters because he wants to paint a picture for us. So please forgive me because today might look a little different from what you're used to. We'll spend much of our time going through each chapter and perhaps not as much time extrapolating, but let's choose to hold on and let's just see where God takes us. All right, so let's just pray as we begin. So Lord, we're just grateful for you this morning. We are grateful that we can gather. We're grateful for your presence. As we dive into your word, Lord, I just ask that you would give us hearts to receive and ears to hear what you want to tell us today. I pray that you would just bring revelation in this space. We are grateful that you choose to teach us. We're grateful that you choose to grow us. We're grateful that you are so patient with us in these things. So just be glorified and honored in this space this morning. We give you glory and praise. Amen. So let's begin in chapter 17. You can follow in your Bibles if you want to, but I will not be reading it verbatim. So you could also listen. And we start in 17 with a man named Micah who lived in the hill country of Ephraim, who confesses to his mother that he's stolen a large sum of money from her, 1,100 shekels of silver, which ChatGPT helped me to calculate as over $1 million today. His mother, who was understandably unhappy when she was robbed, had placed a curse on the thief. And so when her son finds out about this curse, that's when he confesses to her. But she's pleased with him for admitting it, and so she blesses him. But then she takes it a step further and she makes this proclamation that she dedicates the silver to God, but also that in honor of her son, she's going to make him some idols. And so she takes 200 of the silver coins that she gets back, gives them to a silversmith who melts them and makes the idols. And once done, these are put in Micah's house. A little bit later, one day, a young traveler stops at Micah's house. He turns out to be a young Levite who's left his home in Bethlehem and is in search for a new place to live and to settle in. So Micah invites the young man to come and live with him, with the invitation being to be his priest and his father, that he would pay him a wage of 10 shekels of silver a year, plus give him food and give him clothing. The Levite says yes. He moves into the house. Micah installs him as priest, and then Micah then declares this: "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." And so that's chapter 17. In summary, a mother whose idea of restoration is to bless her thieving son by making him idols for his house. A young man who steals from his own mother, lets her use her money to make him idols, creates a personal temple, basically buys himself a priest, and now he believes he has God's favor. The end. And verse 6 of this chapter reveals a recurring theme that we'll see in the next few chapters. And it says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. We go to chapter 18. This chapter is about the tribe of Dan, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. In that season of time, they were looking for land to settle in, as they'd never occupied the land that they'd initially been allocated by Joshua. So they decide to scout for a new place to go to. They select 5 of their best warriors and send them out on the search. These men go out, and when they get to the hill country of Ephraim, they come to the house of Micah, good old Micah of chapter 17, and they spend the night there. While there, they recognize the accent of the young Levite, and they ask him, what's he doing there? To which the Levite replies that he's been hired as Micah's personal priest. Oh, they said, well, ask God whether or not our journey will be successful. The young Levite responds with, go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval. So the men leave and continue to make their way, and they come across a town called Laish, which is peaceful, has wealthy people, the land is fertile, and also it's rather far away from its closest ally. So they go back home and give their report. The tribe of Dan therefore decides to gather together 600 of their warriors and sends this army back out to go and conquer the town of Laish. On their way there, as they get to the area where Micah's house is, the 5 scouts decide to tell the rest of the army about what they saw in that house, about Micah's self-made temple and all the different idols that were stored in there. And then in verse 14, they end their narration with this leading question: what do you think you should do? And they then turn off the road and go to Micah's house, say a polite hello to the young priest, and then they proceed to begin removing the idols. The young Levite, when he realizes what's going on, confronts them and tries to stop them. But they in turn say to him, hey, be quiet. In fact, come with us and be a father and a priest to us, for isn't it better for you to serve a tribe in Israel as priest rather than serve in one household? Guess what? The Levite is like, yes. And in fact, it doesn't just say yes, it says he was quite happy to go with them. NIV version says he was very pleased. New King James says his heart was glad. And so he's clearly very happy. And in fact, he then takes the household idols and the carved images and everything and goes along with the men. And so the army continues along their way. After some distance, they hear some shouting and yelling coming from behind. And it's Micah's household running after them. And so this is what the warriors of Dan do. They turn around and they ask Micah, "What's the matter with you that you called your men out to fight?" The Passion Translation says that they turned around and asked Micah, "What's your problem? Why have you come against us with such company?" I think modern day psychology would call that gaslighting. But kudos to Micah. He stands up to them, and in verse 24, he says, "What do you mean, what's the matter? You've taken away all the gods I've made, and you've taken my priest, and I have nothing left." The men of Dan respond, "Watch what you say. There's some short-tempered men around here who might get angry and kill you and your family." And they turn around and they continue to make their way. Micah, seeing that they are too strong for him, turns around and goes back home. The men of Dan, on the other hand, get to the town of Laish, attack it, burn it to the ground. The rest of the tribe moves in there. They change the name of the town from Laish to Dan. They set up the idols there, appoint Jonathan, who's Moses' grandson, as priest. And so chapter 18 ends with these words: Micah's carved image was worshipped by the tribe of Dan as long as the tabernacle of God remained at Shiloh. The end. We move on to our third short story, chapter 19, which begins with the same sentence as chapter 18. In those days, Israel had no king. This chapter also has a Levite as its protagonist. He's living in the remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, and one day takes for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. For some reason, she gets angry with him at some point and leaves him and moves back to her father's home in Bethlehem. After 4 months, he goes after her to win her back, and when he gets to his father-in-law's house, he's warmly received and encouraged to stay a while. So he stays 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. On the 4th day, he gets up early and is ready to leave, but his father-in-law convinces him to sit down for one more meal, which he says yes to. Father-in-law then extends another invitation to stay the night, which the younger man tries to say no to, but eventually he gives in and he stays the 4th night. On the 5th day, this scene is repeated. The young man is up early again and he's ready to leave. Father-in-law urges him to stay for a meal, this time saying he can delay his departure to the afternoon. Later on in the day, his father-in-law says, "Look, it's almost evening. Stay the night and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early and be on your way." But this time, the man is determined to leave. So he takes his concubine and his donkeys and they depart. However, because they've left late, they will not make it back to Ephraim in daylight hours, and so they need to spend the night in one of the towns along the way. The first option is a town called Jebus, and the Levite servant suggests this as their stopover, but the Levite says no, because it's a foreign town with no Israelites there. So they go further to Gibeah, which is a town in the land of the tribe of Benjamin. And they rest there in the town square as no one offers them shelter. Later that evening, an old man comes along, making his way home from work in the fields. He sees these weary travelers in the town square and stops to find out about their situation. And he ends up urging them to come and stay the night with him, implying that staying out in the square all night might not be the best idea. So they go back with him, they get to freshen up and have a meal together. But while doing so, a bunch of men from the city, described in different Bible versions as troublemakers, worthless fellows, perverted men, come and surround the house, banging on the doors, demanding the old man send out his male guest as they want to know him, to molest him, basically. The old man goes outside to try and appease these men and to stop them from carrying out this very wicked act. And to appease them, he offers his virgin daughter and his guest's concubine. But the men would not listen. And so the Levite takes hold of his concubine and pushes her out the door. What follows is pretty horrific. She's sexually abused all night. And the next morning, when the Levite opens the door to leave, he finds her lifeless body on the threshold. He takes her home, cuts her body up into 12 pieces, and sends a piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel as his way of letting them know that something terrible has happened. And so word goes round, and the entire nation is caught up in the brutality of this event, describing it as the worst they've ever seen since they left Egypt. And a cry for justice emerges. And so there we have it. A husband who goes to retrieve his wife after some sort of disagreement, but 5 days later sacrifices her to save himself. An Israelite town that clearly has no moral compass and tolerates even the most degrading of acts. And this husband who demands justice for his concubine, but failing to recognize that his gory methods of doing so disrespect her even further. Could he really not have sent 12 letters instead? And that's chapter 19, the end. This violent movie continues in chapter 20. It picks up from chapter 19. And now we have the nation of Israel in an uproar, a nation united against a section of their own. This chapter begins with the whole nation assembling together in the presence of God in a place called Mizpah. And the purpose of the gathering is to figure out what happened. So the Levite gives his witness, recounting the story on how they were attacked, conveniently leaving out a few important bits, and then makes his plea for justice, to which the rest of the assembly give their loud and unified support. And so a message is sent out to the tribe of Benjamin to give up the perpetrators so that they might be executed. But guess what? The Benjamites say no. And instead, they gather together at Gibeah, the town where the atrocity happened, and they get ready to fight the Israelites. In number, it's 26,000 warriors plus 700 elite troops. And they must have really been elite because the Bible actually takes the time to describe the level of skill. Israel, on the other hand, has an army size of 400,000 men. However, before going off into battle, they inquire of the Lord on how to attack. God responds, and they go out to fight. With these sorts of numbers, one would expect an easy win for the Israelites. And so what happens over the next 2 days is rather baffling, because the Israelite army suffers great losses, losing about 40,000 men to the much smaller Benjamite side. Each day after being defeated, the nation would go back to Bethel, which is where the Ark of the Lord was located, and they would be in great distress. The first day weeping in God's presence. The second day weeping and fasting and making offerings to Him. And so after the second day of defeat, God's response is more specific, and this time He says to go to them, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. And He does. And so day 3 of the battle is epic, worth an entire movie of its own, described in detail from verses 29 all the way to 43. But in summary, the Israelite army decimates the Benjamite army, except for 600 men who escape and hide. The Israelites then go back to their towns and kill everybody. And the final verse goes like this. The men of Israel came back and killed all the Benjamites who were left, all the people and all the animals they found in every town, and then they torched the towns, sending them up in flames. And that's chapter 20, the end. Chapter 21. Now, if this was an action movie, this is where the background music changes. This chapter begins on a rather different note. Israel is grieving. They're grieving over their brothers, the Benjamites, grieving that they, as a nation, had to fight and kill their own. And a deep sense of compassion arises for the surviving Benjamite men, wondering how they would establish families. Because you see, back in chapter 20, when they'd gathered in Mizpah to make a decision on what to do about the molesting of their concubine, one of the decisions made was a vow to never allow their own daughters to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. But now it seems that the horrors of these past few events are sinking in, and the nation goes back to Bethel, and they sit in the presence of the Lord until the evening, and they weep loudly and bitterly, saying this in verse 3: O Lord, you are the God of Israel. Why did you let this happen? Now one of our tribes is almost gone. The next morning, they build an altar and present their offerings to God. Then they begin to ask each other, who did not show up in the initial gathering at Mizpah? Because they were feeling sorry for their brothers, the Benjamites, and they were trying to figure out how to get them wives because they themselves could not give them their own daughters. And so they realized actually there's a certain section of their community that had not attended that initial gathering, the people of Jabesh Gilead. And so they send down a delegation to them. Would anybody like to guess what happens next? The delegation they send is actually 12,000 of their best warriors, with the orders to kill everybody in the community, women and children included, for not showing up at the gathering. But any virgins found would be exempt from this and instead were to be captured and brought back to the land and given to the remaining Benjamite men as their wives. And so the army goes and carries out the orders. They find 400 virgins and bring them back. The women are not quite enough in number, though. And so the Israelites find that they need to devise yet another plan to find wives for the remaining men. And so the second, not so brilliant plan is for the men to hide in the vineyards of a nearby town, Shiloh, during one of the annual festivals. And when the young women come out for their dances, the men are to rush out, each grab a woman, and run off with her. And so this is what they do. Each man grabbed a woman, carried her off, and they went back to their own land, rebuilt their towns, and lived there. Everyone else in Israel also went back to their own homes. And so we get to the very end of the book of Judges, with the final sentence being, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. The end. Guys, all right? Should I have apologized or said belt up? Don't worry, Christmas is coming. We'll have better stories soon. But so here we are at the end of the book of Judges. And one of the things that has become clear is that this book captures a disheartening theme about the nation of Israel. A people who seemed to be unwilling to live in the holy path established for them, lost in these cycles of rebellion and disobedience, each cycle being worse than the last. It's a book full of violence and a level of waywardness that honestly just feels mind-boggling at times. These last 5 chapters, though, take it to a whole other level. I'm not sure we even have the adjectives to properly describe them. Disturbing stories with extreme violence, stories of depravity and perversion, of wars sanctioned too quickly and lives taken too easily, of judgments made rashly, unwise vows and decisions taking the front seat. All these pointing to a people who seemed to have lost their morals and values, a people who seemed to have forgotten who their true North Star was. From Micah in chapter 17, who builds himself his own shrine, complete with idols and a paid personal priest, completely ignoring or maybe forgetting the first commandment: I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods but me. To the army in chapter 18, who had no qualms bullying and robbing a small household of their idols and their priest, all this as they made their way to conquer a helpless town. This tribe of Dan, by the way, is your classic case of a cowardly bully, unable to occupy the land that they had originally been allocated because they had not been able to kick out the Amorites who were living there. And so instead, years later, deciding to find a different home by attacking the weakest city they could find. They too displaying a severe lack of understanding on who their God is, thinking that by setting up the idols they had stolen and establishing a false priesthood, that somehow they had guaranteed for themselves God's favor and protection. Chapter 19, perhaps the most traumatizing of them all. Depraved men from the tribe of Benjamin attacking a home so as to molest a male visitor. The owner of the home protecting his male guest by offering up instead his daughter and his guest's wife, telling the intruders, quote unquote, to do and abuse them however they like. What happens next fails to conjure up any suitable explanation because his guest, this Levite, takes hold of his concubine and pushes her out himself. And she's raped and abused all night. She dies. Her husband, in a blind bid for justice, dismembers her and sends her pieces to the 12 tribes. In chapter 20, we see the nation gather together and attempt to judge this heinous act that has just been committed. There are one witness conveniently leaving out his role in it. Also, no one questions his bizarre act of cutting up his wife. The nation descends into civil war, with the result being an almost absolute decimation of one of their tribes. Chapter 21 being perhaps the first time in this entire book where we get to see some of the impact of this way of living on the Israelites. We catch a glimpse of some of their inner wounding and trauma when they weep before the Lord, asking him why these misfortunes have fallen upon them as Israel. They mourn the loss of their brothers, the Benjamites, and possibly the end of that bloodline. But in their true fashion of that time, they once again come up with a bunch of toxic solutions. They kill an entire group of people, the people of Jabesh Gilead. Their logic being that they, as Israel, had vowed in Mizpah to kill anybody who did not attend that gathering. Unable to recognize that that same situation, this absence from the gathering, was perhaps a way to get wise for their brothers from within the tribe of Israel. And so their warped, toxic plan A was to kill everybody but keep the virgins. The virgins come up short in number, requiring yet another solution. And so toxic plan B, kidnap young women from a different town. And this is what they do. These stories seem so shocking because for us they seem so far removed from our everyday lives that it's easy enough for us to shake our heads and wonder, what on earth were they thinking? But yet when we look at the world around us, I think we can all agree that atrocities of every kind are happening and that our current world is not too far off from some of what we've just read. But here's the difficult part. And this is the thing that we need to digest and process. The book of Judges was not about the world around them. It's not about the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and all those other ites. The stories here are centered on the people of God, the holy nation, his chosen ones. It's us, the church. All these evil, horrible things were happening in the church, not in the big, bad world out there. You see, Israel, in allowing foreign gods to taint their worship, had declined to the point where they could no longer differentiate between their almighty, all-powerful, sovereign God and the false idols of their pagan neighbors. They got to the point where they thought that they could manufacture from God the results that they wanted. Micah in chapter 18 was so distressed at the theft of his man-made idol and his pay-as-you-go priest that he literally risked his life by chasing after an entire army. His hope so completely in these man-made solutions that he could not envision a future without them. We also see this chosen nation struggling to pursue justice, being able to recognize when something has gone wrong but seemingly incapable of following righteous paths for restoration. Instead, deriving these warped solutions that were just as terrible as the original offense. The Levite in chapter 18 wanting justice for his murdered concubine, but choosing this grossly barbaric method in his pursuit. The tribe of Benjamin choosing to protect the molesters in their midst. And in the final chapter, Israel endorsing the death of an entire group of people in order to fulfill unwisely made vows. And the third thing revealed is this human preference to never take ownership of the roles that we play in our own misfortunes. A young man who steals a small fortune from his own mother but cannot handle it when a neighboring army steals from him. The husband who basically sends his wife out to her death but cries murder when it actually happens and triggers a civil war. A nation that turns on itself and then turns around and asks, God, why did you let this happen to us? Does any of this sound like it could be us today? When we try to capture God through our religious practices but harbor our own idols as well. Or for some of us, it could be that we're unable to own the parts that we play in our own troubles, preferring instead to project onto others and blame them, maybe even cry out to God, why me? Could it be possible that we do recognize injustice today, but our ears are so closed off to what God is saying that we take on the world's solutions to these things instead of finding our own, and in so doing, we fail to represent the true character of God? In this modern world that is so full of sin and so full of evil, do we really stand out as God's chosen people? Or do we blend in because we cannot recognize the ways in which we have diluted ourselves, tainting our own spirits as we try to have our cake and eat it? The book of Judges shows us the levels that the children of God declined to when they stopped worshiping God with all their hearts and souls and minds, when they allowed other gods and idols to step in. And this book mirrors back to us what we as the church begin to look like when we allow idolatry and selfishness and pride to filter into our souls. These last 5 chapters move away from the individual stories and instead zoom out to give us a bird's eye view of the state of the nation in that season. Perhaps to serve as a warning to us, a red light of sorts that says, pay attention, this could be you. To be wary of the things that can draw us away from Him, because some of these things are so subtle that we could very easily be in the midst of them and have absolutely no idea. If the church of that time could be so ignorant in their distance from God and just so foolish in their idol worship, is it possible that we could be the same? We may not have physical idols in these times that we live in, but idols of the heart are many. These things that we cherish, that we turn to for comfort, that we struggle to surrender, these idols that sit in our hearts and make us insensitive to the voice of God, and so we end up struggling to connect with Him because we have these other things competing for our attention and which we end up prioritizing. As we close, I want us to wind up by processing with each other, by getting into groups. So I'm going to ask you to get into small, tiny groups of 2 to 3 maximum. And I just want us to very quickly discuss in like 2 to 3 minutes, what are the thoughts and emotions you had as we read through these last 5 chapters? And what are the ways that you think we as the church of today break a covenant with God without realizing it? And then once you've chatted together, I want you to also talk about what idols do you think could be in your heart? Or what are the things that you need to surrender? What are the things that possibly dilute your relationship with God so that you can pray over each other? So let's do this quickly now. Get into groups of 2 to 3. In the morning, I said 2 to 3, and then there was like 5 groups. So 2 to 3. Just because we don't have much time, so it allows you to speak when you're in smaller groups. It's going to come up on the screen. So what are the thoughts and emotions you had as we read through these last 5 chapters? What ways does the church of today break covenant with God without realizing it? 2 to 3, 2 to 3, no 4 groups.